The morning sun broke gently over Geneva, casting soft reflections on the tall glass facade of the United Nations headquarters. Flags from every corner of the world fluttered in the cold breeze, their colors muted in the early light. Outside, journalists hustled between cameras and microphones, their voices overlapping in a chorus of anticipation and speculation. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet but taut, like a cord pulled to its limit, ready to snap. Among the throng of officials, diplomats, and observers, a single figure moved with composed purpose. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in his plain uniform, no medals, no ostentation, walked through the UN's marble corridors. His steps were measured, deliberate, yet unhurried. The world's eyes were on him, but he moved as if he were just another man walking to an important appointment, not a global spectacle. In a small waiting room just outside the courtroom, Traoré paused. Around him, the hum of conversation carried in low tones. UN aides checked their notes, scribbled in frantic handwriting, while reporters adjusted cameras, each hoping to capture the first expression on his face. Traoré closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. His mind drifted for a moment to the villages of Burkina Faso, dusty roads, children running barefoot to school, mothers carrying water from distant wells. These thoughts were not for nostalgia but for clarity. They reminded him of the weight he bore, and the purpose that no applause or criticism could erase. When the doors to the courtroom opened, a hush fell over the room. Cameras were rolling, translators at their stations poised, and delegates shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly. The court's elongated chamber was filled with a mixture of anticipation and suspicion. Today, the UN would question him about Burkina Faso, about his decisions, his leadership, and the radical measures he had taken to assert national sovereignty. And today, he would answer. Across the room, seated behind a polished mahogany desk, the UN reporter, Thomas Delaney, a middle-aged man with a meticulously pressed suit and a sharp, skeptical gaze, adjusted his microphone. His fingers hovered above the controls as he prepared to speak, his expression betraying both authority and doubt. Around him, the other delegates whispered in multiple languages, some in admiration, others in thinly veiled impatience. The session began with formalities. Traoré was invited to the witness stand, and he did so with a calm nod. No flinching. No dramatics. Just a man ready to speak truth, knowing that in truth lay the power no weapon could provide. Delaney leaned forward, voice steady yet probing. Captain Traoré, thank you for appearing today. Many around the world view your rise to power as sudden, even unconventional. Critics claim your methods bypass traditional democratic processes. How do you respond to such assertions? Traoré's gaze swept across the room. He did not glance at notes or papers. He spoke from memory, from experience, from conviction. Unconventional, perhaps, he replied evenly. But Africa is not a laboratory for foreign intervention, nor a chessboard for global powers. When children go hungry, when schools remain empty, when soldiers die unarmed and unprepared, we cannot wait for permission. Leadership is not measured by titles, nor by process alone, it is measured by action and responsibility. A murmur ran through the delegates. Some nodded, others leaned back, skeptical but attentive. Delaney paused, momentarily disarmed. But Captain, history has judged coups harshly. Power seized through force, even with noble intentions, can undermine long-term stability. How do you ensure your actions serve your people and not your ambition? Traoré's voice remained calm, almost soft, yet each word carried weight. Ambition for power is easy. Ambition for the well-being of a nation is hard. I do not lead for accolades or personal gain. I lead because a generation deserves dignity, because a child in Burkina Faso should not fear hunger or violence. And yes, history will judge me, as it should. But I prefer judgment for acting with conscience than for remaining silent while injustice persists. The court fell silent. Cameras clicked, and even the delegates who had arrived with preconceptions leaned forward. There was an air of something rare, authority grounded in humility. Delaney's next question was sharper, edged with the impatience of the seasoned journalist. Captain, foreign corporations accuse your government of jeopardizing investments, renegotiating contracts without consultation, and challenging international agreements. Could this not provoke economic instability? Traoré's eyes narrowed slightly, but his tone remained steady. Foreign corporations are not people. They are instruments of profit. When their profit comes at the expense of children's education, when their profit robs farmers of their land, when their profit keeps hospitals empty and clinics unstaffed, stability built on exploitation is a lie. My responsibility is to the people I serve. True stability comes not from appeasing outsiders, but from empowering citizens, rebuilding trust, and restoring justice. A young delegate from a neighboring African country raised a hand. Captain Traoré, your words are bold. Yet some argue that forgiveness, though noble, may embolden dissent or rebellion. How do you reconcile mercy with maintaining authority? Traoré's gaze softened. He paused, looking beyond the courtroom walls as if recalling faces from distant villages. Mercy is not weakness, he said gently. It is strength disciplined by conscience. When I forgave former enemies, I did not surrender power, I reclaimed humanity. Rebellion is defeated not only through force but through justice, inclusion, and the offer of a second chance. A leader who cannot forgive is a leader who perpetuates cycles of fear. For the first time, Delaney's hand twitched above the microphone. He opened his mouth, then hesitated. The words in his prepared notes seemed inadequate against the gravity in Traoré's voice. He cleared his throat and asked another question, more pointed. Captain, critics say your vision is idealistic. They claim schools, clinics, and volunteer programs cannot replace real economic structures, and that foreign relations may deteriorate further. What do you say to the skeptics? Traoré leaned forward slightly, hands resting lightly on the table. I say this, I do not ignore economic realities. We have renegotiated mining contracts, strengthened agricultural programs, and invested in education because these are not ideals, they are practical necessities. A nation that cannot feed its children cannot trade them for profit. A nation that cannot educate its youth cannot compete globally. Skepticism is expected, inaction is a crime. A subtle tension rose in the room as the reporters whispered among themselves. Thomas Delaney's eyes narrowed. He had seen many political leaders, polished, rehearsed, defensive, but none who spoke with such serene authority and moral clarity. He clicked his pen, then asked the final question, his tone low. Captain Traoré, are you afraid? Of failure? Of history judging you? Of those who oppose you? Traoré paused. He looked directly at Delaney, calm and unwavering. Fear is natural, he admitted softly. But I am not its prisoner. I have seen hunger, violence, and corruption up close. I have seen the despair in children's eyes and the courage in teachers' hearts. I am accountable to them, not to the noise of the world. Fear does not govern me, responsibility does. And responsibility compels action, even in uncertainty. The courtroom air shifted. Delegates exchanged glances. Reporters clicked their cameras furiously. The hum of whispered commentary became palpable. And then, almost imperceptibly, Delaney's hand moved, and the microphone in front of him went silent. He had switched it off. Not in anger, not in defiance, but in stunned acknowledgement that words could not encapsulate the weight of what he had just heard. A silence settled over the room that was heavier than any applause. Delegates absorbed the magnitude of Traoré's presence, not as a man seeking recognition, but as a leader embodying dignity, vision, and moral clarity. For a few rare minutes, the power of conviction was more tangible than any regulation, policy, or report. When the session concluded, Traoré rose, bowed slightly, and stepped down from the witness stand. Cameras followed, flashes exploding like tiny stars across the room. Delegates approached cautiously, some to shake his hand, others to nod silently, acknowledging a leadership that transcended politics. Outside, crowds had gathered. Activists, journalists, and citizens from around the world craned their necks to catch a glimpse. Some carried signs of support, others simply whispered his name in awe. Later that evening, Traoré stood on the balcony of his temporary residence in Geneva, looking over the calm waters of Lake Geneva. The city lights reflected off the surface, twinkling like 1,000 tiny promises. His aide, Sergeant Diallo, joined him quietly. They watched you today, Captain, Diallo said softly. Every eye. Every reporter. They are stunned. Traoré exhaled slowly, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. I do not lead for their astonishment, he said, voice serene. I lead so that a child in Burkina Faso can sleep without fear, that a teacher can stand proud, that a farmer can work without being exploited. The world will see. But we act not for fame, we act because it is right. Diallo nodded, understanding the unspoken weight of responsibility. And tomorrow? Traoré smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Tomorrow, we continue. Education, health, justice. Our work is never done. Leadership is not measured in applause but in the lives touched and the cycles broken. That night, Geneva slept under a blanket of calm and reflection, while halfway across the world, Burkina Faso stirred. Children played in newly repaired schoolyards, farmers tilled fields with a renewed sense of hope, and parents whispered stories of a leader who chose action over fear, forgiveness over vengeance, and vision over comfort. And somewhere, in the quiet moments before dawn, Captain Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself the briefest pause, a deep breath, a glance toward the future, knowing that a nation's heart had been touched, and that the true work of leadership had only just begun. For those who witnessed it, the UN session would not be remembered as a debate or a hearing, but as a quiet revelation, that courage could be calm, wisdom could be humble, and leadership could speak without raising its voice. And for Thomas Delaney, the reporter who switched off his MIC, it was a lesson he would never forget. Sometimes, the most powerful words are those spoken with truth, purpose, and unwavering integrity. The story of that day would echo far beyond Geneva, not as a political maneuver, not as sensational headlines, but as a reminder that one man's conviction, grounded in justice and humanity, could command the attention of the world, without a single raised hand, without a shouted threat, and without ever losing his calm.